You know that age-old question, could the best college team beat the worst NFL team? And the answer to it is always no. That's still the case, but man, am I considering it with these 2025 Las Vegas Raiders. They are historically bad. So bad that I feel compelled to do a deep dive on what's gone wrong and what other teams can learn from these follies. You're watching Light Boxes, a football show that helps you think outside the box about the NFL. I'm your host, Rob Ballantine. Before I dive in, it would mean the world to me if you like this video and click subscribe to this channel. Doing these things helps get my NFL content out to more fans just like you. Alright, let's break down the putrid, awful Las Vegas Raiders of 2025. Depending on how you slice it, the Raiders might not seem like an outlier as far as bad teams go. They have 2 wins, and since the NFL went to a 17-game schedule in 2021, no team has posted a winless record or just 1 win. The Carolina Panthers in 2023, they went 2-15, and that's the worst these Raiders would be able to do. But let's qualify those wins a little bit, because yeah, one of them was over the 11-3 New England Patriots, but that win was in week 1. It was only 20-13. The Raiders didn't look all that impressive. Really, the Patriots just started off sluggish, and that happens to a lot of good teams. The Lions are really good, and they started off looking terrible against the Packers. The Patriots themselves, the Bears, and the Broncos all started the season 1-2, and now look where they are. So that win has to be contextualized around it being basically preseason. The other Raiders win was back in week 6 over the Tennessee Titans, another one of the league's worst teams. And the Titans were pretty much in active revolt of their head coach Brian Callahan, who was completely overmatched for the position. They had just miraculously beaten the Cardinals in a crazy comeback in week 5. If that hadn't happened, they probably fire Brian Callahan then. Instead, the Titans fire him after losing to the Raiders, which tells you everything. If you're losing that game, you gotta go. To make it worse, the Raiders then lost 31-0 against the Chiefs the next week, and their most recent loss was another 31-0 shutout against the Eagles. And I went back through all of the seasons since 2000. There have only been 2 other instances where a team has been shut out twice in a season and allowed 30 or more points in those losses. And I chose 30 for a reason. It's not just a good round number. The best scoring offenses in the league, Detroit, the LA Rams, Buffalo, they all hover right around 30 points per game. And so if you're allowing 30 points, you're basically turning your opponent into one of the league's best offenses, which the Eagles and Chiefs, they haven't been this season. This while being shut out. So your offense isn't working, your defense isn't working, your special teams can't even get a play. Nothing is going well when you're getting shut out and surrendering 30 or more points. The other 2 teams to have done it besides the 2025 Raiders, the 2021 Texans, and that was the season where in the spring prior, they had found out about the Deshaun Watson sexual misconduct issues, and they ended up starting Tyrod Taylor and Davis Mills most of that season. That was a really difficult season to navigate. And then 2002 was John Fox's first year with the Carolina Panthers. Their 2 shutout losses where they surrendered 30 or more points happened in a 8-game losing streak in the middle of the season. They actually miraculously turned it around and won 4 of their last 5 to end up 7-9, which is crazy, but definitely wasn't a good team. They would later become a good team, and actually the Texans became a good team, so maybe this is a good sign. Maybe the Raiders have hit rock bottom and it's all going up from here. But the fact that they're one of 3 teams to achieve this feat, it doesn't feel good in the moment, let me tell you. One quick fact I have to share about 31-0 shutouts that I found while doing this research. The 2003 season started with the Buffalo Bills beating the New England Patriots 31-0, and it ended with the Patriots beating the Bills 31-0. First week of the season, last week of the season, same teams, same score, just inverted who was the winner and loser. And I just found that interesting. But let's make it even worse, because allowing 31 points is bad. Getting shut out is even worse. But they also failed to put up 100 yards of offense in these 2 games, and now that makes them the only team to achieve this feat. The futility is simply unmatched. So how do the Raiders get here? And moreover, how can we reframe their issues into lessons that we can learn from and make sure teams don't ever repeat again? The first one I got is don't hire an old coach for a rebuild. And I know the Raiders didn't think they were in a rebuild, and that's an issue in and of itself, but sometimes it's hard when the NFL has so much parity not to try to go for it a little bit. But I do think if they'd assessed things properly, they would have realized that this is a rebuild. And most importantly, you don't hire the oldest head coach in the league to captain that ship. Pete Carroll has brought no new ideas. He has not been able to keep a finger on the pulse of the locker room. He's just been largely incompetent and unaware, which can be expected with a coach who's been around as long as he has. Now, he won't get fired midway through the season for a couple of reasons. One is that he commands a lot of respect, and I get that. He's a former Super Bowl winner and a national champion, if that matters, but he's earned that respect in a way that recent coaches like Urban Meyer with the Jags in 2021, Nathaniel Hackett with the Broncos in 2022, Frank Reich with the Panthers in 2023, they were all given the axe midway through the season because those teams realized we just gotta cut bait. Those coaches hadn't quite earned the cachet. But the other reason is the Raiders don't have any money. When you fire a coach, you got to pay the remainder of their contract no matter what. They're still paying John Gruden, Josh McDaniels, and Antonio Pierce, and now, of course, Pete Carroll. So they're a team that's underwater financially to some degree, and they're not going to fire their coach midway through the season. They'll probably keep him for at least another season because of those considerations, which is brutal for fans. Another lesson is don't hire an established offensive coordinator, but not let him bring in his own staff. Now, established could be a stretch for Chip Kelly. He's a household name. He's been in the NFL. His success was mixed. He had a few moments of good offensive football, and then he's mostly been in college, and he did great with Ohio State, but as is usually the case with Ohio State, a lot of people come out of there into the NFL, whether it's players or coaches, and they were propped up by the talent gap between OSU and most of the other teams in college. And then they come to the NFL and they're exposed because there's less of a talent gap. That definitely happened with Carroll, and there were reports of him calling plays in correctly into the huddle and just not being locked in general. So I'm not trying to apologize for Chip Kelly. But they also didn't let him bring in his own staff, and that just can't help. You're working with people you've never worked with before, and you're trying to impart your values as a coach through your position group coaches, and they might just have completely different values, or they might not trust you. And that, again, Chip Kelly might not have earned that trust, but why are you building it with that as a potential pitfall instead of just letting him run the offense with his guys? And if it failed, you could clean house and bring in your own guy. Or on the other side, don't even hire Chip Kelly. Just hire Greg Olsen. Greg Olsen, not the tight end and commentator, but the coach. He's now the interim OC. He was the quarterback's coach. He moved up into that role after Chip Kelly was fired midway through this season. What if you just made him the offensive coordinator from the beginning? I'm not saying he's that good, but there would probably be alignment top to bottom because he's worked with Pete Carroll before. He'd worked with quarterback Geno Smith before. He's actually been the Raiders offensive coordinator on 2 other occasions, which is crazy that he's back. But again, I don't think it's a fresh idea, but it's at least a cohesive idea, which was the issue with bringing in Chip Kelly, but a bunch of staffers not connected to him. A completely separate issue that is not super commonly an issue in the NFL is that some of those staffers were connected to head coach Pete Carroll by blood. Yeah, 2 of his sons are on the staff, and they are seemingly grossly underqualified for these positions. Brennan Carroll is the offensive line coach, and this offensive line is not only bad from a talent perspective, not everybody like Colton Miller a lot, but just on the whole, the talent is lower. But also, their reads are wrong. They're not communicating, and that means the coach isn't teaching it correctly, doesn't have a cohesive system, and so nepotism is why that line is bad. And then another son of his, Nathan Carroll, is the quarterback's coach. He was the assistant quarterback's coach under Greg Olsen before Greg Olsen got promoted to interim offensive coordinator. It's a mess, right? It's palace intrigue. But these sons of Pete Carroll's, they're on the staff. That's its own issue. That, again, I don't think is really a lesson because you don't see it a ton with a lot of NFL teams. You saw it with Bill Belichick and his son Steve, and that had mixed results. But point is, That's not really common. It shouldn't have happened, and it's maybe indicative of Pete Carroll being out of touch, but it's not a systemic problem usually for NFL teams. Another lesson that is commonly talked about, though, is don't pick a running back in the top 10 of the NFL draft, because if you're picking up there, you're probably a bad team that doesn't have enough surrounding pieces for that running back to be successful. And the Raiders took Ashton Jeanty 6th overall this year, and that theory of don't do that has borne fruit. Now, this is not a running backs don't matter conversation. I think they're extremely valuable, but they have a role to play, and there's an order in which you should build your team to have a running back play a critical role. Offensive line is the key. That's gotta be there first. And you can see that the Bears, for example, with DeAndre Swift and a rookie, Kyle Monungai, they're playing really well. Part of it is they have perfect blocking. They have huge holes to hit. They are good players. They are not actually as talented as Ashton Jeanty, but Ashton Jeanty looks like trash, and part of it is that he's getting hit behind the line more often than almost any running back in the league. Sometimes you'll hear a player maybe referred to as the straw that stirs the drink, like a key offensive cog. Sometimes it's a receiver, sometimes it's a running back, though. Saquon Barkley would have been called the straw that stirs the drink in Philadelphia. But the drink's gotta be good. What if the drink sucks? Because the Eagles were great last year with a dominant offensive line, 2 wide receivers that could take over in the passing game, a really good tight end. So then Saquon Barkley, that was not a shot at Jalen Hurts. I'll add Jalen Hurts in there. He's a good quarterback. But all of that infrastructure around Saquon Barkley is what allowed him to be the offensive player of the year last year. Now that infrastructure's worse, and Saquon he's not average from a talent perspective, but from a production standpoint, he's well below his standard. That's what's happening to Jeanty, but Jeanty is far less developed. He has much less NFL experience, and he's in a more toxic ecosystem, which is crazy to say that it's more toxic than the Eagles, but it is. That is not a position in which he can succeed. And so you're wasting a year of his legs and his rookie contract by putting him in a bad situation with a bad offensive line that can't block for him. So that is a huge mistake that the Raiders made. They could have taken any number of trench players at that position that would have really helped build for the future, and just find a running back later. Those are just the sins of this regime, but it goes back further than when Pete Carroll and GM John Spytek and part owner Tom Brady all got involved this year. Because in 2024, the Raiders did something I would also recommend not doing, giving the largest free agent contract to a non-quarterback when you're in a rebuild. And at that point, they did firmly know they were in a rebuild. They had rehired interim head coach Antonio Pierce to be their actual head coach. And that's its own mistake, but I get why teams do it. The locker room really loved Antonio Pierce. It was fine to give him a shot and let yourself rebuild, especially because at quarterback, they were going with Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell. It was clearly a bridge year till you could hire a better coach in 2025, get better at quarterback, all that stuff. So why are you giving Christian Wilkins, defensive tackle, a massive contract in the 2024 offseason? There's no reason to be blowing your cash at that point on that position. Ignoring quarterbacks, the guaranteed money that the Raiders gave Christian Wilkins to leave Miami was the largest in free agency. There were only 2 larger guaranteed sums of all contracts, again, ignoring quarterbacks, in 2024. You've got Chris Jones, who got more guaranteed money, but to stay with Kansas City, and he'd already proven to be the 2nd or 3rd best player on a Super Bowl winning team. And then Brian Burns got the most guaranteed money. He had moved from Carolina to New York, but that was by trade, and so New York, the Giants, were just extending him at that point. Where the Christian Wilkins saga goes is its own story, and there's a lot of good reporting on it out there, and I'm not going to cover it, but he's not with the team anymore. That signing didn't work out in general, but even if it had, what was it doing for you? Having a good defensive line matters, but if there's nothing else around that team, it's just going to go to waste. We're seeing that this year with the 2025 New York Giants. We see it with the Cleveland Browns too, and it's just a shame that this team spent all its money on one player, whether or not he's still with the team, when They're not at that spot. So that's a huge lack of awareness from the Raiders front office at that point. One more lesson to cover, and it's don't use a top 10 pick solely based on physical traits. Because part of why you needed to sign Christian Wilkins in 2024 is because in 2023, they'd taken Tyree Wilson, an edge player, not a defensive tackle, but another defensive lineman, with the 7th overall pick. Up to this point, the Raiders could not figure out how to put complementary pass rush pieces around Max Crosby, who's a superstar. And in the 2023 draft, they did make their attempt at that, taking Tyree Wilson out of Texas Tech. But Tyree Wilson was an older player who'd never really shown savvy, football knowledge, finesse, any of that stuff at Texas Tech. He was overpowering his opponent consistently, which works at the college level. Sometimes those guys are able to become superstars, but it's sort of rare. And even when it happens, it might come from later in the draft. Danielle Hunter comes to mind. So you don't need to use that type of pick on that type of player, especially when here's what you're missing out on. At that pick, I would have taken cornerback Christian Gonzalez out of Oregon, who's now with the Patriots and is a great player. I would have also taken Darnell Wright, who's a tackle in Chicago, or offensive guard Peter Skoronski in Tennessee. Both of them are playing really good offensive line ball in their 3rd year. You could have even taken Jalen Carter, but I get that they didn't want to maybe touch somebody with off-the-field issues, and I actually respect them for that. Not taking that risk when they were at the space they were at, letting the Eagles, who had been to a Super Bowl, take that risk, I think made a lot of sense. But in any case, these are all younger prospects who have already shown more awareness on the field. And that's the key thing. You can have all of the traits in the world, but if you don't know how to play football, you're not going to be able to convert them into any type of production. You have to have your head on a swivel. You have to be thinking critically. You have to be solving problems. All of the best players do. And when you're evaluating draft prospects, it's very hard to know who is going to have the mentality and the wherewithal to become a great player. But the Raiders, just like the other 31 NFL teams, have all the resources to scout these people, to interview them, to really dig into their personalities. And if I could see it from my living room watching clips of this guy, that he was probably not going to blossom into a superstar, it's appalling that the Raiders couldn't see it with all their resources. Those are the important lessons, the ones that really all say that you can't skip steps. You got to understand where you're at in your team building process and take only the next step, not skip anything, not try to rush your development. That's the key through line to all these lessons. I do want to say one thing though. Taking Brock Bowers at the top of the 2024 draft was not a mistake. Normally, taking a tight end in that position is probably not the best use of resources when you're rebuilding, but it is super clear, and was in the draft, that Brock Bowers is a generational superstar talent that you can build a passing game around. He was able to set records as a rookie with Gardner Minshew, Aiden O'Connell, and Desmond Ridder throwing him passes. So to me, aside from injury, he's bulletproof, and this is a guy that I want to have on my football team, especially when you took him 13th overall and he fell to you. You didn't have to trade up for him. So I do respect that choice, even if normally taking a tight end there maybe doesn't raise your ceiling the highest. Brock Bowers is an exception, so good on you, Raiders. You did do at least one thing right. And that'll do it. And thank God, because it kind of gets my blood pressure rising. I'm sorry if I got worked up there, but man, the Raiders really grind my gears. They're a poorly run franchise with mistakes that casual fans like me can see coming from a mile away. And it's odd to see them be this bad currently when you think about Tom Brady being a partial owner and a major puppeteer of this team. He's so competitive and he's shown a lot of smarts over the years, but so far it's not going well. Maybe his competitive nature is blinding him, and that's part of why they're not properly rebuilding. But it's tough to watch, and I'm sure Raiders fans have it harder than me. I'm just watching as an analyst, but that's the state of the Raiders, and I hope you've enjoyed this discussion and found it cathartic, whatever you feel. Regardless, if you've had fun here, it would mean everything to me if you liked this video and subscribed to the channel. Really want to help grow this community, and I want you to be a part of it. This is Light Boxes. I'm Rob Ballantine. Thank you so much for watching. and I'll see you soon.